Well, Warrior Next Door listeners, you know what that music means. It's another air raid edition. For those who don't know, an air raid edition is something that's somewhat outside of our normal content, but we think is still interesting. We kind of got away from that last year, and I think we're going to have more air raid editions that will normally drop on the Thursdays between series. But in this particular instance, we couldn't wait. We had to drop it now. So sit back and enjoy. This particular air raid edition features some of our findings and learnings and a sneak preview of some of the content that was derived from our recent trip to Europe. So sit back and enjoy.
We're live. All right.
Yay!
Well, cool. Well, Warrior Next Door listeners, this is a bit of a departure from our normal content, but what we want to do is spend a little time just talking about some of the highlights of the trip that we mentioned that Ryan and I took to Luxembourg in Belgium and Germany. We did a variety of things, most of them associated with the podcast, and we want to share with you some of the highlights that are relevant to some of the material that we're going to share with you guys on the trip that may be of interest to people who enjoy podcasts like The Warrior Next Door, where you can, not only hear firsthand accounts from the people we've interviewed, but also what Ryan and I like doing is going to the places that these guys were and trying to relive some of those moments, trying to place ourselves there. So, Ryan, really, this trip, the genesis of it was a relationship you established with Peter Lyon, the author of the book, The American Saint Nick. Your ability to connect with him, to move forward with an audio version of his book that's still on our website right now, our podcast right now. If you haven't had a chance to listen over Christmas, it's still great. Go ahead and take us through the genesis of the trip, because at the end of the day, that relationship is the reason we ended up going there.
Well, I'll do this very, very quickly. As listeners know, my wife's grandfather, Oscar Solis, fought in the 44th Combat Engineers, and he fought in the defense of Wiltz Luxembourg at the onset of the German Battle of the Bulge push. They call it the von Rundstedt offensive. But as the Germans came in through the town of Eschweiler and down into the valley of where Wiltz is, his unit was there as kind of a ragtag unit along with a bunch of other units to defend the town and hold off the Germans as long as possible. Long story short, they did hold them off a bit, but then there was every man for himself, and he ended up being captured and becoming a POW. So fast forward 60 years from that, my wife and I go over to Wiltz to retrace his steps, and we get to meet some people there. We go in the museum, and we learn about the American Saint Nick story there for the first time. Later on, a book comes out written by Peter Lyon called The American Saint Nick. I read the book, learned a lot more about the story. When we launched our podcast, I had it in the back of my mind that it'd be great to reach out to authors, and Peter being one of them, and we did that. And we were able to finagle him or talk him into, featuring his book, but also doing this annual reading of his book, because we feel pretty strongly that it's a pretty timeless story, and it speaks to the kindness that was, on our side compared to, what transpired on the other side. So long story short, we became friends with Peter Lyon throughout this whole process. We started collaborating together. And he said at one point, he goes, hey, well, you know what, you guys, you and Tony, you guys, and bring your families, you should come over for the 80th anniversary of the American Saint Nick. That'll be in December or late November, early December of 2025. Or 2024, sorry. And so we're like, heck yeah. So, Tony and I will jump at the chance to go over to Europe and be there with the people who, really provide a behind the scenes view of a lot of what's happened. So we went over there, we got to meet all of the people who were in charge of the American Saint Nick, or the UVA Saint Nicolas, committee. Well, it's hard to say for an Illinois/Oklahoma guy. What we ended up doing, Peter somehow talked me into working up a set of acoustic songs on guitar to play with him. So we had like a little acoustic duo. And we played at the reception there at the Wiltz Castle a few nights before the actual anniversary and the festival and everything, kind of to kick it
this
off.
this was November 29th, basically. So to give people a timeline, when we were there, the American Nicholas Festival isn't over Christmas. It's in the first week of December.
True.
So right
Very
before
true.
December on the 29th, that's when you guys had basically the jam session, right?
Yeah.
When you guys had a reception, you guys had a chance to play some songs, and we had our first Facebook Live.
That's really the most important thing, I think, is a milestone for the podcast, is that we had our first ever Facebook Live event. It was a seat of the pants sort of thing. Tony was the man on the street, running around in the room, talking to people. I don't know how many people we had online for the actual Facebook Live event, but
we ended up with about 60 or 70 people at one point.
Wow.
The most
Wow.
we had. People would trickle in and out here and there. They'd sit in for a while. And for our audience, if you did join that Facebook Live, we hadn't done this before. If it seemed like it was just me just recording things and talking to people, that's right. It was. There was no agenda. All we wanted to do is give you guys a sneak peek into some of the things that we've been talking about doing. So
yeah, and it was good. It was good and strategic that you didn't dwell too long on me and Peter playing, because you would have likely seen a train wreck, or at least the cars coming off the track a few times. But
you guys, you're being too cruel. The music that night was perfect ambiance for all of the people who were there drinking various brewskis and everything. The Simone Pills is the local.
Yeah, that's very
brew.
good beer. Very good beer.
Great beer. They brew it right there in the castle in Wiltz Luxembourg, in the castle. We were drinking beer that came from there. And so after 3 or 4 beers, it really didn't matter what you guys sounded like, Ryan. Everyone had a good time.
Well, speaking of that, Peter did send me this week a link to a video that he made, that he had his own camera set up. And there's some actual video footage that's centered on Peter and I, and he has edited it heavily to get only the scenes where there aren't the back of people's heads in front of the camera and stuff.
Camera.
Yeah. And so we put that out on our Facebook page for anyone that wants to watch it and stuff. And you'll see a photo bomber at the very end that we've got an APB out for this person who is actually photobombing the camera and stuff like that. So Tony, do you know who that is?
I don't know who that would be. It sounds like an incredibly rude person that was just trying to draw attention to themselves as opposed to the event. So I don't know who would do that, but
it's okay though. Sometimes these people that get in front of the cameras, they're a little dense. They don't really have much, intelligence, behind their face there and stuff. So
they're not right, Ryan.
No, I'm just
they're not right.
Anyway, it was him. So after that, so I was just going to say, after that, we wrapped things up. It was a great night. It was such an honor to be able to play there in front of everyone. It was a little strange, I'll be honest with you, to play American classic rock songs in a room full of people from Luxembourg that didn't really speak English that well. I wasn't sure how it would go over, but people shouted out and hooted and hollered at times when we played like Johnny Cash and stuff. So that worked out good. So, but then the next day, I think the next day was when we did our tour with Peter, right, Tony?
Yep.
Okay.
We basically went to some of the key sites where he identified and researched and incorporated in his second book that he wrote. His first was The American Saint Nick. The second one was called Merg, M-E-R-G, which is written about an affluent young private named George Mergenthaler from the Mergenthaler family, who were independently wealthy, blue blood Americans. He did not have to join the war effort, but he did. He didn't just join the war effort, as go in as an officer, which he could have done because he's college educated. He wanted to go in as a GI. And he did. It came in as a private, as basically a reconnaissance platoon, which is the tip of the spear. They're the ones that are sticking their face out there to get shot at. And if they survive, to come back and say, hey, this is where the Germans are because they shot at us. And he would die during the push that the Germans had during the Battle of the Bulge. And we had a chance to not only see the site, the memorial, and the area where he died, but also the town where he
Yeah.
developed these really strong relationships with the people. So, Ryan, do you want to go ahead and add a little more color to that?
Yeah, yeah. That takes, that really covers quite a bit of it. The town itself of Eschweiler is just up the road a bit. Like if you go through the town of Wiltz, and it's in a valley, and the beautiful picturesque valley. You go outside of the town, and you head up the highway, and you end up in this little village of Eschweiler, and it's also beautiful, very picturesque, and he became so close to the townspeople while he was stationed there during a few months of 1944, that that they really began to revere him. And the reason why I think he was so connected to the people of the town was because he could speak their language.
Yeah.
He could speak, several languages. He could speak German, he could speak,
French.
French and everything. And so he was able to communicate better than most, of the GIs that were there. So he developed a relationship with the priest in the town at the church, with the family that he was bungalowed with and everything. And so it was really a fantastic story of a selfless guy. And, lo and behold, the night the Germans pushed through in mid-December of 44, when the thrust of the German army was coming through that area, they were leaving the town. The town was being evacuated. They were in a convoy going down the road right by what's today called the Cafe Halt. And as they were coming down that road, they were ambushed by the Germans, who were lying in wait on a hillside just to the left of the road there. And he very bravely, they were in a Jeep that had a machine gun on it. He stood up on the machine gun and began firing at the Germans, and allowed his comrades to escape up the hillside to the right and across this little clearing into a tree line. And so, but in doing so, he was wounded, and was actually, I think, shot through the neck. And the rest of the guys got away. He and a medic were left behind. It turns out that a German officer nearby, they moved him after that out of the way of the area to clear the road, and they tried to interrogate him. Supposedly, as the story goes, he made some comment back to the German officer that was probably derogatory, and it was in German. So that's when the guy realized that was listening to them all the time, and he pulled out his pistol and he executed Mr. Mergenthaler right there alongside the road. He was then buried. They found his grave a few months later at the end of the battle, and there's a roadside marker there now that is approximately where his body was found. So that was a really enlightening thing. We went to the cathedral in town, which, Tony, tell us about what the cathedral was like in this town of Eschweiler.
It was beautiful. Pretty much, it's not like I'm some kind of world traveler, but with Ryan and his family, and then my wife and I, we've had a chance to go to Europe several times these past 4 or 5 years. And we visit these churches, which would just be a garden variety ho-hum church in the town. Nothing special, not to Notre Dame, but they're all beautiful. They're all old. A lot of them have these relics in them that help tie the congregation to some sort of saint or some sort of historical event within the church. And it was beautiful. And as you walk to the front of the church with the stained glass windows, and most of these stained glass windows were blown out and destroyed during the war, there was this beautiful stained glass window that they had constructed of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. And standing behind Jesus is a GI. And this GI was cast in the likeness of George Morgenthaler. And so that was the town's way of honoring this man that they became extremely close to. And to this day, you can go in that church and you can see that memorial to George. They definitely know it. And in fact, the memorial itself, it was interesting because I wondered, it's like, okay, well, the church has this in there. Is there a living memory of this in this town? Well, we had a bit of a bonding moment when we were in Eichweiler, when we were checking out the, so imagine a car we had, I think it was
Filled with tourists, filled with American tourists.
Yes, you had my wife and I, Ryan's wife and Ryan, and then Peter. And I had not really gotten to know Peter that much up into this point. I went to the reception, we talked a bit. This was a really good bonding moment because I got our car stuck in the memorial. I was trying to turn around. The weather in Northern Europe at this time of year is really wet and cloudy, although we had a pretty good day that day. And after we had a chance to walk around and get all this really cool footage of the exact location where these things that Ryan just articulated happened, I just go to turn around and drive out of there, we get stuck. And we're trying to do everything. We're pushing the car. We're getting floor mats out, thinking maybe we could drive on the floor mats. We were supposed to have snow tires on the damn thing, but I think they lied to us because it couldn't even handle wet grass. At any rate, this Cafe Halt that Ryan mentioned, which is it's been around for a long time. There's pictures of it from World War I in the 1800s. We ended up walking down there and to try to get a tow truck. And
it's like a half mile away or something, just down the road. Yeah,
down there. Ryan always wanted to check out the Cafe Halt. So not only did we have a chance through this episode to get to know Peter well, especially a frustrated Peter who had shit to do that day, and I got us stuck. But also we had a chance to hang out at Cafe Halt, talk to the owner who only speaks Luxembourgese, try to get a cab on a Thursday or whatever day it was in the middle of it feels like the middle of nowhere. When you speak English, and I'm trying to use Google Translate to Luxembourgese, but the bottom line is we ended up getting a local with a tractor to come and pull us out. And this is what the guy asked me when he pulled us out. He asked us why we were at the memorial. And I said, well, we're here to check out this and whatnot. He started asking us questions about George. He goes, so do you know George Mergenthaler? Do you know much about him? He basically knew. He was a local. He knew about the history. He knew what was going on.
And this wasn't an old guy. This was a fairly young guy, right?
Yeah, probably our age, right? Not some 80-year-old veteran or 90-year-old veteran, just a dude. And so there's a living memory of this. And we were able to provide him a gift outside of the money that I gave him to have him pull us out, which was, hey, do you want to meet the author of the book that's considered the book on this event? And the guy's like, yeah. He goes, oh, it's right here. It's Peter Lyon. So he had a chance to meet Peter Lyon. They had this really cool conversation.
Meanwhile, Peter's going, oh, thanks, Tony. Yeah, what a great way to meet a fan, Right.
So it ended up being a great day. Not only we see some historical stuff, but sometimes these little episodes, these things that can happen can have unexpected benefits. And for us, we had a chance to hang out and drink at the Cafe Halt. We had a chance to get to know Peter better. We got to meet one of the locals. And we also met the guy who gave us a ride and set all this up was one of the owners of the restaurant that we would have a banquet in after the American St. Nick celebration. So all these things were tied together. It felt kind of really interesting.
Didn't we leave from there and go up there and have lunch?
We sure did.
And that guy was the owner of at least the manager of that restaurant. And you walk in, I saw you walk in, you're like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, how do you know somebody here?
Because he's the one that just gave us a ride up there and did all this. And so while Ryan and Peter were getting drunk at the Cafe Halt, I'm flagging down traffic, trying to get help because the lady in the restaurant doesn't understand anything we're saying. So it ended up being one of those days where when it happened, you're like, man, this is a bunch of crap. I got the car stuck. We have all this stuff going on this afternoon. It felt like it would just be a shitty day. And it ended up being kind of a really cool event.
Oh, it was, yeah. I mean, you salvaged the day. It was a great time. We all laugh about it now. We've got footage. We have footage of the act of getting stuck. The footage of all of us, including author Peter Lyon, trying to push the car out. We've got footage from Cafe Halt. We've documented it all. So we'll put it out. We'll make a little compilation of that sometime. It
was memorable. And then after that, the thing that was going on is there was a bunch of planning that was going on for the American St. Nick Parade. But what was the next big thing we did after that, Rhino?
Well, I mean, after that, I think Peter and I, we decided that we probably should practice. So we.
Oh, that's right. This happened before the reception. That's what was.
That's right.
Dawn at us was, holy crap! These guys are going to play guitar later, and they're stuck on the Fleischweiler.
That's right. Yeah, because when we got there that first day, when you guys came in, Peter and I were doing a dry run in the cathedral, in the castle, making sure the sound equipment worked, making sure everything was cool. And then Tony and Amanda came, and we, high-fived each other, drank some beers and stuff. The next day was the Merg trip. We got stuck, and we're thinking, we got to play a gig later. How are we going to get back, Well, no big deal. We got back. Everything went great that night. And then the following day was...
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, the following day was, I think, which for me was one of the highlights of the trip for sure.
Yeah.
And that was a tour we did, a battlefield tour we did with Berten Smeckens and Shane Neagle.
Yes.
And Tony, tell us how you met Berten. I mean, we featured him on a video that's on our page on our website before, but give us a little overview.
So Berten is from Belgium, but he worked in the United States as a geophysicist, which is what Ryan and I, that's our profession, is our geophysicist in the energy sector. He and his wife decided to raise their kids in Belgium where they grew up. So they left the United States and have been living in Belgium. He's been working as a geophysicist ever since. And his job is really fascinating. There's so much unexploded ordnance in Europe because of all the wars that if you want to build anything, you got to bring these guys in. And they do geophysical surveys using magnetometers, ground penetrating radar, whatever they need to use to look for bombs and shells and missiles and everything. And he finds all of this amazing stuff. Old trench lines and dog tags and shells and guns and helmets.
Because you have to understand, I mean, this area of Europe has been fought over in both world wars.
Yes.
So you've got trenches in Flanders Fields and Ypres and all these areas where World War I battlegrounds took place. And you have World War II, where the Germans pushed through in 1940, then they got pushed out in 1944, then they came back in 1944, then they got pushed out again in 1945. So
you have Napoleonic.
Of course,
battles near Waterloo, just north of there, from Napoleonic Wars. It is a dripping with history. So not only is Bert a geophysicist and finds these things to make it safe to build on, but he's a historian. He has his own mission to be able to find really what Berten likes doing more than anything outside of finding these historical artifacts is he likes on his spare time looking for crash sites from these bombers or these airplanes. And
there are literally thousands of them
all
around.
over the place, and being able to find MIAs. What he enjoys doing more than anything is to find and reconnect families with lost servicemen who are MIAs. He and a whole bunch of people like him over there spend an inordinate amount of time doing this sort of thing, and we're going to talk about that more. As we go through this, we're going to share this with our audience. So basically, I met with Berten. He became a fan of ours on our website and our podcast. And then his friend Shane is an American who lives in the same village that he lives in. He is an Army veteran who served a couple of tours in the Gulf Wars. And
probably what, his mid-30s?
Probably mid-30s, a much younger guy than us. Yep. Soft-spoken, really cool dude. And so we spent the day together. Berten and Shane put an itinerary together, and I'm just gonna share the highlights, and then we can speak briefly to each one. So one of the places that we went to was a place called a crash site that's being excavated by another American. And the name of the plane they identified is Bull Session. Ryan, what do you remember about that crash site?
Oh my gosh. So one of the things that was so cool, it's called WWII is what I think I'm pronouncing it right. But you pulled up, we're like on a frontage road next to this 4-lane kind of interstate to the left.
Field.
Divided highway. We're on this frontage road, and he's like, Berten says, okay, look out there about, 200 yards away. There's 3 hills out there, 3 mounds. That's WWII. That's 3 hills. And they were, I believe, they were Viking burial mounds. Is that correct?
That's right.
So you had Viking burial mounds out in this field. Then he said also what happened here during the war, there was an American convoy that came from that town over there, which is where my office is, by the way. and was coming down this very road that we're standing on, which, by the way, is a Roman era road that's 2,000 years old.
Yep.
And they were coming down this road. They were caught out in the open by German artillery, and they were just, laid to waste. I mean, this American convoy was just wiped out. So that happened on this stretch of road. And the final thing is, there was it a B-24 or a B-17?
I thought it was a B-17.
Was coming back from a mission, bombing mission. They were hit. The plane crashed at the bend in the road that we were standing on. And if you look at the bend in the road, there are these trees that are spaced out, as they do over there a lot in Europe. Yep. They're very good about having things being very ordered and very, manicured looking. Well, these trees were planted like in a certain, and they were obviously older than, 80 years, which is when, the war ended, or when this event happened. Mm-hmm. And you could see crooks in the tree. You could see where they had sustained some sort of damage. Now, I in my mind, I'm thinking that maybe it's from the bomber that crashed right here. Yeah. And it very well could have been, but it also could have just been from the war. Who knows?
All kinds of things happen there.
So anyway, this American, I think he's a Texan, Patrick Murphy, has been over there, has taken it on as his life work at this point to do an excavation of this field where he believes there are still some MIAs from that bomber that are somewhere in this field, because he would like to make sure that they're reinterred back in the USA, or at least in the Henri Chapelle Cemetery. So that's what I remember from that.
Yeah, and the name of the bomber was Bull Session. And that's so right. So that was one of the sites we went on. It was really memorable. We're gonna have Berten. We're going to have the video. We're going to edit it. We're going to share it with our audience later, and he's going to take you through a more detailed account of it. I think our audience not only likes to, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think if our audience is like-minded like us, they not only enjoy to hear these firsthand personal accounts, but also some of these really cool stories, maybe from people we didn't interview, but from people who are trying to bring back what happened there and to find some of these MIAs. So that was one of the areas. The another one, there's 3 or 4 of these that really stuck out, was the Eric Fisher Wood Memorial, which I don't think I'd be shocked. If you're listening to this and you've heard of this guy, for the love of all things holy, reach out to us on Facebook or on our Warrior Next Door website so we can contact you, because we hadn't heard about this. Just give our audience a brief summary of this Rambo man.
This story is what captured me more than anything on that day trip. We're driving along with Berten and Shane in Burton's work truck, and Tony and I are in the back seat of his quad cab, and we're geeking out. We're driving down this timber road, and it's, of course, classic Belgian, woods, tall, dark forest, tall trees, and we come upon this very lonely memorial that's put there as a monument, and it says, Eric Fisher Wood. It was, died on this spot, surrounded by 7 dead Germans. And so Berten tells us the story of this young Army captain whose father was Eric Fisher Wood Sr., and he was a brigadier general in the Army during that time, was in charge of an artillery unit. And they were encircled by the Germans some miles away. But Mr. Eric Fisher Wood, Captain Wood, was able to get 3 of his howitzer units out of the pocket before they were completely encircled. And so that in and of itself was, pretty heroic to be able to not let these artillery pieces fall into German hands. So anyway, he makes his way into the woods because the rest of his unit was going to surrender. He's like, the heck with that, I'm not surrendering. Makes his way through the woods to this area called Meyer Road, is Meyerode. He comes across other stragglers, and he and this other guy link up. They go to this local house. They ask if they could stay there and get warm for the night and be fed. They were friendly to the Americans, luckily for them. They stayed there, and the young captain was speaking with the man of the house. And I don't know if they spoke English or if he spoke their language or not, but what was said was, I'm not going to surrender. I'm just going to wage my own war. So then he leaves, and they never see him again. And then they hear, for the next few weeks, they hear sporadic gunfire in the woods in the region.
Yep.
And they find out later that, after the war had ended, the Graves registration came through, and they found Eric Fisher Wood's body at this spot that was the memorial along the road. And just as I said, he was dead, and he had 7 dead Germans around him. What's interesting is that Mr. Wood was not stripped of any of his gear. Still had his boots on, still had all his ammo. He had a bunch of
wallet, his money, all of that.
All of that stuff, which would have been stripped of him by any German that survived that fight.
Yep.
Or that was not wounded himself.
Yep.
They would
have taken it for our audience, not just for war booty, but for intel. To be able to give it to the CO and say, hey, this is someone that was out there. And this area, this sector, was known to be a hot sector by the Germans, even when they pushed through for guerrilla activity. Right around this time was happening. So there seems to be some circumstantial and some hard evidence with the body, the Graves registration report, that seems to indicate that this guy and maybe some other stragglers with him fought a guerrilla action behind enemy lines during the Battle of the Bulge and died fighting to the last bullet.
This guy was an actual Rambo. I mean, honestly, this needs to be a movie or the next subject of a miniseries. But they also found, the Graves registration found, that in the area were over 200 shallow graves of German soldiers.
Yeah.
So what you could surmise from that is that he and his guerrilla band attacked German convoys as they came through, or anyone who was coming into the woods to ferret these guys out. Basically killed them, buried them, and took their gear, and that's how they sustained themselves.
It needs to be investigated. Ryan was pestering Peter to write a book on it. But at any rate, that was one of the memorable things. We've got a couple of others before we move on. Yes. Some of these we had the Wereth 11 is a location where black GIs who were separated from their unit during the Battle of the Bulge, like most men were during the Battle of the Bulge. There was a lot of chaos. Units were being overrun. The lines of communication were disrupted. To make this story, I want to keep it short because we're going to have Shane on to talk about it in more detail. But basically, there's a monument there to some black GIs who were executed by the local SS division in that area. Tortured. Yeah, not just executed, absolutely. Like fingers cut off, right? Like one person from the post-mortem report had a bayonet to the eye. That's how he died. Yep. So we're going to have Shane on. He's done a bunch of new research on this, and we're going to have a special episode on that. The other one, and this is what I want Ryan to comment more on because he's more knowledgeable of it, is we had a chance to go to an Alamo, a place where a small group of soldiers, and a book has been written on it, had a chance to fight back and hold up a German, several brigades, many times their size. And Ryan, tell us about that 99th.
So this was my request for a place that we could go on this day trip, and it's the 99th INR platoon's location on the hillside above the town of Lanzareth. Now, if you've ever read the book, or if you know of the book called The Longest Winter by Alex Kershaw, if you've not read it, or if you can get the audiobook, please do. It is one of the most awesome stories of this unit and what they went through and the impact that they had on the onset and the initial thrust of the German bulge through that area. It's an amazing story, but it's all about Captain Lyle Bauk, who is from St. Louis, Missouri, and his unit. There was a squad of about 15 guys that were placed on this hillside before the Battle of the Bulge broke out. They were told, dig in here, put some fortifications in here, dig some foxholes, just keep watch over the town there. We'll be back for you in like 2 days. This was like December 10th of 44. Well, lo and behold, they didn't come back in 2 days to get them, to relieve them. And then the German Bulge broke out, and lo and behold, guess who comes through the town of Lanzareth, but Camp Group Piper's initial thrust? that's going to come through that town, come up the hillside by not far from where these guys are dug in. And so we got to go to the spot where their foxholes still exist to this day. There's a monument there on this little farm road that goes up within 100 yards of the woods there. And what's amazing to me is we were there. We got to walk around the foxholes that day. It was dusk, starting to get dark. Cold. And Berten pulls out his laptop and he plays a YouTube video of Captain Lyle Bauch in a later part of his life, giving a 35-40 minute interview on the very actions that occurred and what all happened. And we're sitting there watching this video on the hood of Berten's truck, and right over there are the woods. And the road we're standing on that still has barbed wire that I actually cut my hand on was where they took out many hundreds of Germans, and they were just heaped against this fence as they came up over the hillside to try to knock out Mr. Bauch's platoon.
And that's where the truck was parked. I think the most amazing part is that the truck was parked next to this road with this fence. And as we're watching this video, and as Bauch is talking about, then the Germans were piled up around this fence 100 or so yards to the corner of our position. We looked around and we're like, we're parked next to that area. This is where all of these Germans were just laid out, hundreds of them. I mean, and we were out there, it was getting dark, we were freezing our ass off, and it was almost holy being able to watch that video and have him describe all of the things he saw after we just walked in those foxholes, and we were able to look at the road, look at the village, look at the area of the field in front of him where all these dead Germans once were. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's time travel. You know, it really is. You're just 80 trips around the sun away from being back there. You know, I mean, it's just, to me, that's what a lot of us geeks on this stuff love to do and live for. Even if you're a Civil War vet, like a geek and a history buff, it's standing where the actions happened. And to know a story that happened in the very spot that you're standing, that to me is just the ultimate, so like my wife doesn't really share that. She's like, well, if I'm going to stand in a field and say, well, something happened here, she'd rather see the actual, scars of it, as opposed to imagine this, but that's okay. That's what makes the world go around. That's why her and I are a good yin and yang sort of thing, but anyway, it was a truly amazing moment to stand there and listen to these stories being told by the guys that were there. So and they held the Germans off. They held the Germans off for most of an afternoon, I believe, at that location until they were finally captured. Many of them severely wounded, shot through the face. 2 of them shot through the face, but they both survived the war. Anyway, amazing stuff. That's all I'll say about that, because we could go on forever.
Totally. That trip. Thank you, Berten. Thank you, Shane. They put it all together. They put the itinerary. We had a blast. And then the next thing that we did the following day was, of course, the American St. Nick. We're not going to get in that in deep detail because there's a video of everything that we did, what it looked like. It's on our Facebook page. It's on our website. But just some high-level points for it. There was the 80th anniversary of the American St. Nick. Ryan and I had a chance to walk in the parade. Ryan had a chance to ride in some of the vehicles that they brought there from World War II and zip around with Peter. We had a chance to understand, the tradition of the American St. Nick, including Black Peter. And then we saw the celebration afterwards where thousands of kids were waiting in line to meet Black Peter and the American St. Nick. It was a really good day. Ryan,
one of the things that, real quick, the only thing I'm going to say is, so whenever we were getting ready to go down to the end of the rue or the end of the avenue, we were at the castle. We had to go all the way down the other end of the avenue where the parade was going to start. That was where we all had to gather, those of us who were walking in the parade, which was Tony and I and Amanda and Peter Lyon and David Brookins, which is Richard Brookins' son, and a whole host of people. It was such an honor. But there's all these military vehicles, all these reenactors that are in the courtyard of the castle, and they are going to be in the parade too. Peter's like, let's see if we can get a ride with these guys. I'm like, okay, whatever. You know, I didn't think he'd be able to, but Peter's a schmoozer. He's like, and so the guy's like, yeah, sure, hop in. So we get to ride in this army Jeep with this fella from Bastogne, who is a reenactor, and the Jeep's from 1945. Got to talk to him. I've got video of that. We'll put it on Facebook at some point here. So cool, and on our website. But I just want to thank real quick, so a few names. Tom Paquet, who is the president of the Oeuvre St. Nicholas, was such a gracious guy. He's a friend now. We just had a great time with him. You know, obviously Vic Weber, who was also the past president of the Oeuvre St. Nicholas. He was very heavily involved and was on the committee, and just a gracious guy. You know, there's just a whole host of people that we got to meet that were just, you know, fantastic. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Yeah, when we walked in the parade, what was just great about it was, you know, being able to walk down the street right behind us, as you can see from Tony's video that he put out, that's on our website and I've shared on our Facebook page, is the American Saint Nick riding in the Jeep, and we're walking, and we're with the royalty, so to speak, Peter Lyon and David Brookins and all these people that are part of the real tradition now, and it's just such a humbling thing.
And David Brookins, for those who don't know, is Richard Brookins' son, and Richard Brookins was the American Saint Nick. He was the GI that was there during the war that dressed up as the American Saint Nick and brought this celebration to the kids who haven't had it in a long time. And as we're walking down the Grand Rue, David Brookins is giving us a tour, and Peter Lyon saying, that's the house right there that my dad stayed in. There's the church that, you know, they were able to meet Father Wolf and celebrate this. And then to have it end at the castle and to walk through the same portico, the same opening in the castle that the Jeep drove through, and to reenact that was amazing. But we also had a chance to see another extremely historically relevant dwelling in Wiltz. Ryan, what did we have a chance to see?
We're walking around. It was after the parade. No, actually, this was before the parade. This was like I think it was the day before or 2 days before. We're walking around the town. And Peter's like, right here is the Villa Adler. It's the largest home in town. And he goes, I know the lady who lives there. She lives there by herself now. I don't even know if she's at home right now. But she goes, let me go up to the door. Let me see if I'll knock and see if she's home. So we're all standing in the alley there. Peter walks into her backyard, walks across the backyard, goes up to her back door, knock, 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 knock. And then all we hear is the door open, and she goes, Peter! And it's like, we all look at each other like, oh my gosh, is this not the coolest thing, to hear this reaction, this genuine reaction from someone who knew Peter from his previous visits and everything. So anyway, he invites us, we all get invited into this lady, her name is Maisie. I don't recall her last name, but we've got it somewhere. And she lives in this house all by herself, okay? She's a wonderful, super classy lady. The thing that my wife pointed out to me was she sits around in her house all day in nylon and her hair done up like she's getting ready to go to a ball. Yeah. That's just how she carries herself. So what's great about this house, Tony, tell us the historical significance of this house. There's two big things about it that are relevant to this story.
Well, thing one is because it's the largest, most opulent house in Wiltz today even, but especially back in 1944. Not only was it the command post for the Germans when they occupied the city, but when the Americans pushed them out and took command of this very crucial area in the front line, it was the command center for not only the 29th Infantry Division as they were resting, but for some of the largest, some of the biggest names in the ETO, the European theater. It ended up being a place where people like Eisenhower and Marshall of the Marshall Plan, right? The Secretary of Defense. Omar Bradley.
Troy Middleton.
Anyone who was anyone in 1944 on the American side stayed in this house. It was a command center. And there's this amazing photograph that was taken in the front window of the living room that you had Eisenhower and Bradley and Marshall and all of these bigwigs were there. And we sat in the same window and took a selfie of us. And everything was, I mean, the drapes were different, but the radiator, the window, everything was exactly
It's a bay window. Yeah, it was a bay window with the
Yes.
radiator heat in the front there.
So that there was a lot of history in the house there. And then secondly, in the basement was the control center for all of the signal companies, for all of the communications, because that's where you'd want to have it, right? Is where the generals
Yeah.
and all the general staff is.
And it was a fortified, I mean, it's a fortified, very well-built home with this
Yep.
awesome cement basement.
Yep. And
mean, just-
in one of the rooms, and we had a chance to go down there, was the room where Richard Brookins,
That's
the
it.
American
Yes,
St.
sir.
Nicholas, worked on his cryptographer, decrypting messages and sending them up to the general staff upstairs. We had a chance to see both those things in the same house.
And it's, yeah, that was like, you know, it should be a museum almost. You know, it should be, I mean, you know, luckily they already have a museum at the castle, and that's where it should be. But this is also a historical place, you know, so fantastic
awesome.
stuff.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the first half of our air raid edition, which focused on our trip to Wiltz and all the amazing things that we saw there, and we're going to share with our audience later on. Please stay tuned for part 2 of this series. It was too long to keep it as one particular part, but in part 2, we go to the Hurtgen forest, we go to Cologne, Germany. We do some pretty amazing things, and that will lead to some, we think, pretty cool content that you guys will enjoy as 2025 starts to unfold. Take care. Welcome back to our second installment of the Air Raid edition, featuring some of the project ideas that were made available to us from our experiences in Europe, celebrating the 80th anniversary of the American St. Nick. So join us for this second and final installment, where we speak more about the Hurtgen Forest and a variety of other really cool things.
And then the goodness continues, because after the American St. Nick, after visiting the Villa Adler and hanging out with Mizey and all that, we had a chance to go with Peter for a book signing tour at the Manhay Museum. And just really quick before I hand it off to Ryan, the town of Manhay was the very, if you think of a bulge, the Battle of the Bulge, this salient, this bulge coming in from the east to the west, and the northern edge of that bulge were a series of defensive positions where we stopped them cold, where they could advance no further. And Manhay was one of those towns where one of our armored divisions were like, you will not continue north along this route. And there was a huge amount of fighting there. And Ryan,
You shall not pass.
oh, dude, it was so Gandalf-like, man. It's like there's all these maps that show the German attack trying to go north as they work their way up to Antwerp, and they're just blunted by this armored division. But Ryan, tell about the Manhay Museum and who we met there.
Yeah, so, you know, like as Tony said, Peter had a book signing there at the museum. He said, hey, you guys should come along on this, and, you know, maybe you could do like a live event, a Facebook live event from there. So we did. And Peter had, along with his publisher, Peter Kranz, actually set up, you know, to have a few people come in to the museum, one being Bob Koenigs, who is a very well-respected, highly regarded historian in the area, who's in charge of, or one of the contributors to the YouTube channel, Snafu Docs, which does
great.
Yes,
Yes.
they do these great analyses of things that happen, stories you've not heard. They go to the spots, they show photos of the spot back then and where you're at now. They do a fantastic job of telling the story of how things really happened and how you can see these things today. So we go through and we do a tour of this museum. But one of the first things we do when we launch the Facebook Live event, before we launched the event, before we went live, we were speaking to the owner of the museum as a nice French woman who was behind the counter there. She didn't speak much English, But we started speaking to her, and we just said, can you tell us about your museum? And she instantly started getting choked up and started to cry and could not continue to talk. And then we found out that it was actually her husband's museum. He had recently passed away, and now she's the curator of the museum. And so our heart just went out to her. I mean, her and her husband had built this place. She's lost her husband. Her name is Maggie Gillebois. She's a great person. We want to go back and be able to do more events from that area, because that part of Belgium, I think, if you're not Bastogne or the Band of Brothers locations, they kind of get a little bit overlooked. But one of the things we did is we did our Facebook Live event from there, and we got to meet a few other people while we were there. Tony, you want to talk about some of those people?
Yeah, so it turns out that there's another individual from the area named Victor Yassen, who, as a 6 or 7-year-old kid, witnessed an American bomber crash right in a field in front of him.
300 yards from him.
300 yards from him. And he remembers running up to the plane and seeing what you would unfortunately see as a young kid. There were still some bodies in the plane. And from that point on, he became obsessed with, once he learned more about the plane and learned that there were MIAs, that there were people who were not recovered, he remembered the plane, he remembered the crash, he became obsessed, just like Berten and a lot of other people over there are. It's amazing how much they honor our dead over there, with finding these MIAs. And he took it to a level that you can't believe. And we sat down, we interviewed him. We're going to make sure that we play this on our website and maybe make a podcast episode to give you more detail. So I don't want to get too detailed, but the high level overview is this. We sat down with Victor. We were told, look, he doesn't really like talking, he doesn't like interviewing people, but he agreed to do it. So this is an interview that we were very fortunate to get.
Yeah.
And not only did it consume him seeing this as a kid, he ended up buying the property that the plane crashed on, making it his own personal archaeological site, and then reluctantly brought in Bob Koenig, who's one of the guys that provides content for Snafu Docs, to help him with this. And now they're working together on excavating this site. And it just the memorialization, the dedication, the drive to make sure these things are not forgotten, and that the people who never came home can come back home and not be MIAs anymore. That over there impressed me more than anything about the locals that we met. It was pretty common.
Yeah, I will say that I think another one of the reasons why he bought the property, because he wanted to protect it from souvenir hunters.
Absolutely.
He found it disrespectful for people to drive up, go over there, kick around, looking with the metal detectors or with a shovel digging stuff up. This is a grave. This is a spot where someone lost their life. So. So I mean, we were so thankful and so lucky to be able to get to speak to him and everything. Did you have anything else you wanted to say on that, Tony?
All I want to let our audience know is that interview. There's a big Panther tank out there. There's things that Bob showed us in the thing. We had a chance to meet Bob's wife, who's a psychologist. She talked about post-traumatic stress. We're going to make smaller episodes on those coming forward, so look forward to them.
One of the things I also want, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. One of the things I wanted to also call attention to, and we'll put this out on our website and the Facebook page, that tiger tank that's out in front of the museum is one of the tanks.
Panther.
It's a Panther, was one of the tanks that actually was knocked out right in that region right there. Yes. Okay, and it's been there since the war. And so it's sitting out in the elements. It's starting to kind of rust away a little bit. And there's an effort underway to build an enclosure for it so that they're not going to restore it. They may fix it a bit. They're going to put the right color scheme on it, put the right number on it because it's been repainted and stuff over the decades. But it's called Save the Panther. They're trying to collect money for this, okay? And I would encourage people, if you have a sense of history and you want to donate to something to help preserve history for anyone that comes after us, this is a way to do it, So yes, and Tony, what you said about how the people over there revere and sincerely, heartfelt appreciate what the Allies did during World War II in the Battle of the Bulge. It is such a humbling experience to go around over there. And how many times did you hear on this trip, Tony, whether you were at Wiltz or whether you were in Manhay or anywhere out in those rural regions, that they were indebted to us?
Yeah.
Us, Tony and I,
right.
Because we are Americans and we're descendants of that generation, even though we didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a pretty sobering thing to realize that you're the vessel for them now for hearkening back to that mindset. And so,
I'd like to add something to that really quick, Ryan, before I forget. So Berten, who has taken us on a tour, he's from Europe. He has a passion for this. A lot of other people do. When we were out on our day trip, Ryan and I asked him, we're like, why do so many people in Europe, younger people, still remember this? Why do they care about this? Because it's not like that in the United States. I said, in the United States, people don't really have this appreciation for this period of history and what it meant for, how we live our lives today. And what Berten said was really fascinating. He said, you Americans have never had your country taken away from you. You've never been occupied. You've never been annexed. You've never had an occupying force come in and massacre your citizens, put you in concentration camps. You've never had people come in there and make you learn a language that's not English. He said, when those things happen to a country, it's deeply traumatic. And we don't forget that. It's hard for us to forget that. We're 3 or 4 generations removed, he said, and there's still people my age and younger, this is Berten talking, who's younger than us, he's in his 40s, he said, who still appreciate that. And I had never thought about that historical perspective before.
What's interesting is and this that brought up something I just remembered, that he was talking about how there are still sentiments that bubble to the surface or are just beneath the surface for a lot of people there, even of Berten's age, who've grown up, with their parents and grandparents talking about, what the enemy did, how they, behaved themselves, what the Americans did, what the British did, and how they are responsible for, their lives. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, this kind of touches on that, is when we were at the WWII 11 location, the monument, and we're up there, it's me and Tony and Berten and Shane, and Shane's given us a little overview of the story that happened there. And what happened down there on the highway, right, as we were there was a car that pulled up, and they just sat there and were like watching us.
Yes.
And Berten kept looking at him like, what the hell are they doing? And then another car pulls up, going the other direction. They stop right in the highway
and watch us.
And they watch us at this location. And we're like, I don't know what this is all about, but it feels a little dark.
It feels like the beginning of a horror movie, right?
It feels like, like a decades later, sort of like the remnant of, I don't know what, but it was very wild.
Let me add some color to it for audience. Why would people who fought against the Germans maybe take a little umbrage to this memorial where these black soldiers were massacred by the SS? Well, what Berten told us is in this strip of Belgium and Germany, there were a lot of native Germans who, due to previous treaties and previous wars, were living in these areas that were technically in countries that were allied with the United States. And there was, in Shane, and when we go through this with the WWII 11, found some evidence that maybe the locals could have been complicit in bringing the SS in to kill these black soldiers, to execute and torture them.
Yeah, it was very quick after they arrived at that house that there was a knock at the door.
So we're gonna cover that with Shane, but it's really complicated over there. Obviously, the people who weren't of German descent, people like Bert and others, oh my gosh, the outpouring of love that they had for us in America was something that you need to experience if you can. Just know it happens if you haven't been over there. But then we started learning about all these little factions and these little divisions that exist along these border communities. It's really complicated and very interesting.
Yeah, and it's amazing and really a little bit clandestine to think that there's still, this sort of potential for attitude and animosity still beneath the surface. And so
in these little strips in these border communities
Yeah.
where you wouldn't
And
even know.
And then when we leave, we're in Burton's truck and we drive right by these two vehicles sitting there watching us. And Burton rolls his window down and just glares at him the whole time when we go by. And I'm like, yeah,
Oh,
Burton, yeah.
Burton is a badass, I'll tell you.
Yeah, Burton's a guy that if he would have been around during the war, he would have been in the resistance. I can tell
he would
you.
have been leading the resistance.
He would have been, he's an amazing guy. I want to hang around that guy a lot. I want to be around him. He rubs off on me in a way makes me a better man,
Totally.
So cool stuff.
He'll be introduced to our audience. So that's the Manhay stuff. We're gonna have a lot more on that. And then so the next thing that Ryan and I did that we want to talk about briefly is we decided to roll into Germany, check out some more stuff for the ladies this time, and we stopped. Go ahead.
Real quick, we forgot about going to the Henri Chapelle Cemetery.
Yes, that's
that
right.
was the
out.
end of the Manhay Day.
Yeah.
And it's just real quick, Berten suggested we come there. We follow him there. It wasn't very far away. So we went with him and Shane. Actually, Shane met us there. Shane was sick, but he still met us there. We walk around at the very end of the day, right as the cemetery is closing, and he wanted to show us a few of the graves. We got to see the grave of Eric Fisher Wood Jr.
Yeah.
We got to see the grave of a few of the guys. Some of the Wereth 11 guys were there. Mm-hmm. And again, we asked Berten, the subject came up. Why, why the reverence? I mean, it was, I don't remember why we asked again, but it came up again. And Berten broke down and started getting a little teary-eyed because, he was saying, without what you guys did, what your countries did here 80 years ago, I might not be here. My children may not be here, and so again, it's a humbling thing to be over there as an American in these circles with these people that have this appreciation. Not everyone does, but the crowd we hung out with definitely did. And what a great group of people.
At the cemetery, the reason that that was brought up is during COVID, he went there. I don't know if it's Memorial Day. It was one of the veterans' holidays, and he was upset. They play taps every morning and evening, and he was upset during COVID that wasn't happening, that there weren't people that were doing that. So he went there with his kids and had a recording of it on his phone and held up the phone and played taps during that celebration because to memorialize them, because during COVID that was shut down. So he went there to make sure that happened at least on that day.
And then wasn't he told to leave? Wasn't he escorted out?
Yeah.
During that very visit?
I don't remember if it was that visit
incident?
or another one, but it really pissed him off. And in fact, we had a guy come out to ask us to leave because it's getting dark. And Berten rode up on him because Berten thought he was going to kick us out, and Berten was not having it. And the guy so he starts speaking French to the guy, and the guy's like, I don't speak French. It was an English dude, like an American.
Right.
And Berten's like, oh, okay. He's like, well, I got things to show these people. And the guy's like, all right, I'm cool with it. I just wanted to let you know to shut the gate on the way out.
Yeah, that was amazing. Anyway, sorry to digress. Go ahead. And we're on our way to Cologne.
A couple more things, audience, and we'll wrap this up. We don't want to, wax too poetic on everything, but these are things that you're going to hear and see more about that we think you're going to enjoy. Otherwise, we wouldn't bring them up. And the other one, the next one, I don't know if we're going to do an episode on this, but we just want to let you know we were in Cologne, Germany. It was a beautiful town. They've got this amazing cathedral there. It's really historic. In the waning days of World War II, Cologne was right on the border. We were crossing. We were into Germany. We were doing stuff. But there was a Gestapo museum there.
Yeah.
And what was really cool is they had a choice back in the 80s to either tear it down and turn it into an office building or make it into a museum where they would never forget how the fine citizens, and I mean that literally, I don't think that Germans are inherently bad people, but they they got pulled into this vortex of history, I like to call it, that ended up,
Yeah.
allowing Cologne to be a Nazi stronghold. And they had the Gestapo headquarters, and they turned it into a museum. And Ryan, what were some of the things that you saw there? You were like, holy crap.
Well, I mean, the whole upper floor of the museum. First of all, it's unchanged. The tile, everything in there is still the way it was back during the war and everything. But the whole upper floors of the museum are It's a museum of the rise, or a museum of the Third Reich, and it shows you step by step how Hitler came to power. All the things, all the directives that came down that created this creeping Nazism and death grip on the people of Europe, really. Not only people of Germany, but the people of Europe. And how he was able to sway religious leaders, and I mean, all of these different, factions of people, and how he was able to really, implement this plan that came out of his, fevered brain while he was in, the prison there after the beer hall push. Anyway, from there, the museum is amazing, but was really poignant was the basement,
the cells.
Tony, tell us about that.
So you gotta remember, the Gestapo was putting people in jail in the 30s, even before the war. And at one point they repainted the jail cells, but then through a period of history, and I got a book on it that talks more to this, as people were imprisoned in there, they would do things. They would scrawl on the wall. They would scrawl their last will and testament. They would scrawl how many days they're there. They would scrawl about the indignity, the injustice of what they were there. Some of it was funny. There was a French guy that said, yeah, I just got thrown in this prison. I guess this is typical of German hospitality. I mean, all of this. And what they did is they've documented all of this graffiti, if you want to call that, and they put it in this beautiful hardbound book that I bought. And I'll share some of these excerpts when we do an episode on this. But it was a snapshot in time where you could read, and some of these were heartbreaking. There were moms in there that didn't know where their kids were, where the Gestapo just completely disrupted and molested people's lives. And when the doors, you can still swing the doors. You can see the little cover, this latch that slid to the left, and it was all dirty and grubby from years of dirty, grubby hands touching it. You can look into the cell and see what the prison guards would have seen. And then as you go around the corner, there's a courtyard, and that's where they executed people. Yeah. And not a few people. They don't even know the number. They know in a small period in 1944, over 400 people were hung out there, and they turned that courtyard into a memorial. It was absolutely, the feelings that you get walking through there were sadness, helplessness, anger, all of it, all at the same time.
And you pointed out something while we were standing in that little, what's now a garden out there now. We were standing and looking around, and you were like, look at all of the office buildings around this that date back to that period.
Yep.
That all have windows.
Yep.
Think of the people who were able to look out those windows every day and see what was going on down there below.
And there was a placard in one of the hallways where one of the prisoners talked about, one of the things that's often asked about these atrocities is, what did the German people know? And a lot of times you'll hear, well, they didn't know much. How could they have known? They didn't know, right? Well, this placard was an eyewitness, someone who survived the prison system, and talked about being out in the courtyard for, I don't know what the reason was, but it was a she, and she wasn't executed. She's like, the people around the courtyard, those buildings, could look down and see this happening. So don't tell me that people didn't know. And so that was a really powerful. I'm not saying that every German knew everything all the time, everywhere. I just know that I just know that this idea that when the war ended, no one was a Nazi and no one saw anything is ridiculous. And there was a placard there that showed, well, at least in this little corner right here, we've got direct evidence that some people at least knew what was going on.
Well, I'll say this, that if you were a German citizen, we learned this from Marta Warner, there was such a creeping movement there by the government, by the Nazis, to take control of every aspect of your life, to be able to control whether you could eat, to whether you could keep your business or not. And to find out people were being shipped out in the dead of night to these camps, that would have such an ice cold feeling of like terror on everyone. I can only imagine, like her dad said,
Yep.
keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
I mean, people felt like they couldn't do anything.
Yep.
You know, unless you were okay with your whole family line being executed and sent to, Buchenwald or something.
Yep. I agree. And so the point I'm trying to make is that people knew. But what I'm also going to make is I don't know how I would have reacted if I lived in one of those apartments back in 1944. Would I have said something?
I tell you what I like to think is that I would have enough foresight to get my family the heck out of the country.
Yeah.
Maybe with me, but hopefully if I had to stay back, well, then it's on. You know what I mean? It's like, but I don't want my family or even my aunts or my uncles or, I don't want them subjected to a pushback that I instigate. I mean, anyway, who knows? This is such a tough question.
It really is. And so that was the high low light of the thing. And we're going to do an episode on that where I want to read some of these excerpts to our audience. I think you'll find them very, very compelling. And then since we were in Germany, Ryan and I could not help ourselves. We got in the car. We left the wives behind.
Oh, that's right.
I say behind. Look, Cologne has this amazing Christmas tradition and festival. The ladies did not have anything. They had all kinds of shit to do, but we went into the Hurtgen forest, which many people will say was probably the most misguided offensive of the entire, of at least the European theater. That and Peleliu might be the two in the entire war.
It was the longest, most brutal campaign that the U.S. Army fought during the ETO.
It chewed up whole divisions, and it's tied to the American St. Nick because the 29th Infantry Division got chewed up in the Hurtgen.
28th.
I'm sorry, 28th. Thank you. The 28th Infantry Division got chewed up in the Hurtgen, sent to Wiltz Luxembourg to recuperate. That's the division that Richard Brookins was in. And then all the things we talked about earlier with the Battle of the Bulge would happen to them. But in the Hurtgen forest, it was a nightmarish place for a battle. It was in a place where human beings typically have this innate monkey brain fear of forest and darkness and all that, right? I mean, no one wants to be lost in a forest, right? And imagine fighting a battle there with the mines. And so there was this really cool hike we did called the Call Trail, Kall. And Ryan, what were some of the things that you remember about that hike?
Well, first of all, Tony's like, we're driving that day. We park in this little area in town, this little town of Wassenack, which is where a lot of fighting happened during the Battle of the Hurtgen. And we park there, and Tony's like, I think we go this way. So I'm following Tony. I'm like, I don't know if he knows where the hell he's going or not, But anyway, so we walk through town, and then we walk out on this little farm road across this big cow pasture for it seems like a mile, and we start going down this little slope, and we finally get to the edge of this valley. That is a ridiculously steep valley. I was amazed at how steep this trail was that went down.
Anyone could even fight a war there.
I was like, whose idea was this? Yeah. This is crazy. And so we get down to the bottom. We find the bridge that crosses the Call River. And the Call River, even though it's called a river, it's a stream. It's a creek. It's, it's maybe, I don't know, I'd say maybe 20 feet wide, something like that. And the Americans, the 28th Infantry, decided that they were going to take their Sherman tanks with the 707th Tank Battalion, and they were going to go along this cow trail through the valley to go to do a shortcut over to the town of Schmidt and try to come at the Germans that way. And it was just a horrible situation for these guys to be in. They're down in a valley, okay? The Germans are up high with artillery doing tree bursts. And we walk along, and one of the first things we see is we cross the Call River Bridge, Tony?
Well, the couple of things. One is you see a road that cuts right to the right, and also where the stream was was an area that you could still see the scars from, where those Sherman tanks forded the river because they couldn't use the bridge. The bridge wouldn't hold.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it was even wide enough for a
No.
tank. I don't know, but it would have been tough.
And it was a trip. And there are, and Ryan and I read different books on the Hurtgen before we went there. And right across the bridge, as it veers to the left and goes up the hill, you know, one of the tanks, I think, was taken out there,
Yeah.
or was hit by a Panzerfaust. There was pieces of the trail that were collapsing into the Call River. There, as we hiked up the trail, there was an area that you can see. It's probably one of the most photographed portions of the trail, where as a tank was going up a hill to engage in battle, it was hit by a Panzerfaust or something. Its track came off, and the engineers used that track. They hammered it into the trail for subsequent tanks to use to go into the lugs to get purchased to make it up this hill. And you can walk and touch this track to this day. And then as we continued up the hill, we got to the high ground, the highest of the high ground. And that's where the Germans were. And guess what we saw?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, all those foxholes and all those fighting positions. It was all still there.
Hundreds
Everywhere.
of foxholes on that hillside, just waiting for anyone to come up that trail.
And we stood in some of those foxholes and looked down, and they didn't have a chance. I mean, the view from those foxholes on those roads and the bridge and the valley, and all this happened in the winter when there was no foliage on the trees. I mean, the Americans never had a chance.
Yeah, I know it's kind of tragic. I don't know how anyone survived that. They must have had to have gone around and gone around the flanks or something like that rather than charging straight into it. But
which is what they ended up doing. It was after the Battle of the Bulge, some units of the 82nd Infantry Division would actually go in there and finally take that area. And the horrors that the 82nd Airborne Division saw, the dead Americans, the dead Germans, the brutality of the fight left a deep impression on, I think it was Gavin in the 82nd, on him. He's like, why in the hell did we send anyone in here? And they were finally able to take it as an afterthought, but it was a terrible battle. And
one of the things I was going to say real quick, there's a great YouTube channel called The History Traveler. It's part of the Gettysburg Museum of Natural History, and it's I forget the fellow's name that goes around all over the world to battlefields and does just fantastic videos on events that happen and standing where they fought. Well, he does one on the Hurtgen, like a 3-part series, and he hikes the same trail we did, the Call Trail. One of the things he said in that, I rewatched the video when I got back. I watched it beforehand, but I'd forgotten this. He said that tank tread that's in the road, that while they were, looking at that one day, a guy comes out of the house right by there where we were, and he said, "Hey, my dad actually put that track in the road, and it wasn't until after the war that he did it."
Oh, really?
Because there was a lot of surplus stuff around, and he got this tank tread, and he put it there for him to be able to go up that road. Because you can come out of that house, and you come out of the driveway, you turn right, you go up the road right there, and that's where the tank tread is, right there. It's almost so. It sounds like perhaps that's not a World War II relic that was used by the engineers.
Because I read that. I
did too.
What the engineers did is they put that track in, but some local is refuting that, huh?
He's saying that his dad actually, when they built that house, his dad put the track in the road to, for traction for them as they try to get out of there, whenever they're in the winter and stuff. Now, so, and the guy on the History Travel is like, that's what we're told, so you take it for whatever you want, but regardless, it's still a piece of history. It came from the area, and underneath it,
from a Sherman tank,
underneath it, you can see in our pictures that there's another tread underneath it, and they think that's from a weasel.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
the weasels, because it's different, it's not as wide, and those weasels were used to great importance during that battle. They were taking the wounded back and forth across the Call River to an aid station, which, by the way, we forgot to look for when we were there. I can't believe we forgot to look for it. It's an amazing spot on the hillside that we came down to come into the valley. There's an aid station right off the trail, right there. That was where both American and German wounded were treated.
Yeah, and there's a memorial on the bridge to a ceasefire that occurred during the battle, where the Germans primarily came out and helped a bunch of wounded GIs, and that was memorialized at the bridge as that ceasefire, and both sides helping each other out to take care of their wounded.
And you know, when we were coming down the trail, Tony, where we found these little like path-side shrines of candles,
Yep.
I bet you right there nearby was where the aid station was.
I bet you're right. And I want to add one more thing to that for our audience. We talked about how the locals still memorialize a lot of the Americans and the things that happened there. These shrines that we saw had candles in them, and they weren't LED candles. They were the small hand-lit wax candles. And we just talked about the hike that we made to get down there. And I won't tell you the condition Ryan was in when he got on the other side going up. But I'm here to tell you.
What? What are you talking about?
Someone had to go down there and light those. And it was like a Wednesday, right? And there was nothing special about this day. And the fact that there's still people down there lighting these candles, physically doing that, is amazing to me.
Well, and we wonder, when we were walking across that mile-long open, meadow from the town down to the trailhead, we ran into a guy.
Yes.
Who was walking the other direction.
Who lost his dog.
He's like, hey, if you see a dog, where I lost my dog, took off running, and he's, anyway, so we're like, okay.
Yeah.
But I wonder if perhaps he might have been down there to do that.
Well, that would show what is going on then, and it's really cool if that's happening.
Yeah.
And then after we left the call trail, we let Ryan nurse his burning legs. And then we saw some really cool things that I've only seen in black and white photos or movies, which is the West Wall, which is a wall that was constructed along the border with Germany. They anticipated that someday there might be some sort of counterattack, and they wanted these fortifications, and they had bunkers and dragon's teeth, and it was just so cool to see that. And I've had a chance to look at my pictures of those since we come home, and they still look haunting, even though they're in color and they've got, maybe it's because there's moss growing on them.
Yeah.
They're really freaking creepy looking. Some of these go through like farmers' fields. They farm around them. There's like cow poop on them as a cows just kind of meander through these dragon's teeth. It was pretty cool to be able to do that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was amazing. Tony and I just drove around that day. After that, going to those spots where we knew there were strong points at one point, where there were pillboxes. Yep. Tony, I think you may have actually come home with a piece of a pillbox. Is that right?
I broke the law. I took an artifact and you can see the stain, the piece where the rebar went through it, and it's sitting. Yep. I've got a front room where I listen to records, and I have a bunch of things that I've collected over the years, and it is there now. It is now part of that, along with. So one of the things with the American Saint Nick, going back to that, is Black Peter has sticks. And if you're bad, he comes in the house and clubs the hell out of you. And if you get a stick, it means you've been a bad boy. He gave me one of those sticks. I have it. And that's probably displayed there too. So I love these trips. I love bringing stuff like that back. I'm so sentimental. I'm such a
you're a big mush ball. That's right. Under that shiny pate of yours is nothing but a big mush ball.
I'm just a big ball of mush. So after that, we've got a few more things that we did. Some you did solo, but really after that, Amanda and I, we left, and everything else that you had a chance to look at was with you and Aaron and your daughter Lauren. I forgot she was there as well.
Yeah, so we stayed a few days longer than Tony and Amanda. We left from Cologne and we drove down to the Rhine Valley region, and we stayed at this little picturesque town of Bacharach, Germany, and it's all day long, you'll see the Viking River cruise boats going by and stuff, But anyway, this town's a medieval town, a real small village. We stayed in a really cool little apartment complex there. But anyway, long story short, there wasn't a lot of World War II history that I knew of right there in that town. But we got in the car one day when it was raining. We drove on down the river valley, and we came to this town of Bingen, Bingen. And that was actually a fairly large kind of city. And you could tell it was a bit industrialized. Well, as a matter of fact, during the war, there was industry there, and the U.S. launched a very large, I think it was 1,000 bomber raid on this town of Bingen. I don't know what was actually being built there. I'll have to do some research, and we'll talk more about it. But it was heavily bombed during the war. Some of the planes that came back from that mission didn't make it far, and they actually crashed right near the town of Bacharach where we were staying. So from there, we stayed there for a few days, got to see some of the really picturesque castles and awesome medieval history, really, of the region. And then we drove from there back up. Well, actually, I take that back. On our way down to Bacharach, we stopped by the town of Remagen. Oh. And Remagen is where the famous Remagen Bridge was during World War II. There's a great movie about, it's called The Bridge at Remagen, but it's a spot where we gained our first crossing over the Rhine that, as the Allies pushed forward in the region, they came to the town of Remagen, and lo and behold, there's still a bridge intact that crosses the river there.
It was a botched demolition attempt, wasn't it?
Well, not at that moment. They tried to blow it right as we were trying to cross, and it was botched.
That's it. Yep.
And then we were still able to use that bridge, and we got thousands of troops and material and armament across that bridge to the other side to get a serious foothold across the Rhine. And then finally, the Germans were coming in, and they had Stukas that were dive bombing the bridge. They had artillery fire.
They sending like V2 bombs and stuff after it.
V2, absolutely. Yeah. They were trying to take this bridge out. Hitler was furious that this bridge.
He had the crew that screwed up the demolition executed.
He did.
He was furious. He was psychotic about it.
He was psychotic about it. And he wiped out the crew that was responsible for the demolition not going through all the way. So anyway, long story short, the bridge does finally collapse. Yeah. A number of engineers were killed. But by that time, we had already built a separate pontoon bridge across the river, anticipating the collapse of the bridge. And we were able to continue getting across the bridge by using this pontoon, or across the river using that pontoon. All that's left today are the bridge abutments on each side of the river.
Did you learn, why did they rebuild it? It was such an important bridge.
So after the war, it's never been rebuilt.
Yeah.
And to this day, so the museum was closed when I went there. It's the off season. Yeah. Everything shuts down in the winter over there. I'd love to go back and go into the museum. There's a museum right at one of the bridge abutments. You can go in and you can see the whole history of the fighting and what happened and the story. But the bridge was never rebuilt. Yeah. I don't know why the decision was to not rebuild it, but to this day, there's not a good crossing of the Rhine for like 60 miles. So think, I mean, if you can look across the river, you might as well be, 120 miles away,
right?
Because you got to go 60 miles down and 60 miles back just to get there, So it's amazing that they have it. I think there've been talk actually in recent years of maybe finally putting one back in, but I don't know if that's going to happen. So anyway, I could only stay about 10 minutes there. It was raining out. I could not get close to the bridge. I just parked in an overlook. Got some pictures, but we'll do a story on that down the road that talks a bit more about the Remagen Bridge and everything. Okay. So,
and then you guys had a chance, the coup de grace, your last stop. Now, of course, for our audience, our families did like touristy stuff, but we're just sharing things with you that we may want to feature, that you may be interested in. And that last stop was
Amsterdam. We actually went up to Amsterdam, stayed there for 2 nights. Before we flew out, we flew in and out of Amsterdam on this trip. And the 2 things that we saw there, other than the town being just fantastic, even though it was December, what a great city, an amazing city to walk. All the canals everywhere, all the great restaurants. It's just an awesome place. I can't imagine how it looks in the spring and in the summer. I bet it's just gorgeous. But we're walking around, my wife and I, because my daughter's sick and she's back in the hotel room with what later turned out to maybe be COVID. But we're walking around the city of Amsterdam, and we notice as we're walking along these canals, and we're walking in front of apartment buildings and little condos that are old, not new. We notice these gold-colored bricks in the pavement. They took these pavers out and put gold papers in every once in a while. So I stopped and I took a picture. I started to read these, and they're actually memorials to people who lived there during World War II that were deported by the Gestapo to concentration camps and never made it back. And I've got a picture here. Here's one of them at this spot here. I don't know if you can see it very well. Probably not. But let me do this. And
I can see it.
So,
And you sent me one, and when I had a chance to look at oh my gosh, go ahead and tell people what.
This one here is of two people. It was a couple that lived there. They were born in the late 1880s, and so imagine, and they were actually taken prisoner by the Gestapo, December the 7th of 1943. So think about that. They would have been in their late 60s, maybe close to 70 years old at that point.
Yep.
And they were deported to Auschwitz. Well, what are they going to do with a 70-year-old person? They went straight to the gas chamber. And as a matter of fact, that person ended up dying. The woman died, about 3 weeks later.
So right away.
Right away. Some, however, that were like newlywed couples with an infant baby were sent to Auschwitz, and the mother and the baby died the day they arrived in Auschwitz. They were taken off the train, sent straight to the gas chamber. And the husband, who was separated from them, likely didn't know their fate, but he died like 3 weeks later. So there are these gold bricks everywhere over there. And it's very sobering to walk around looking, at this beautiful city, seeing all the people having fun, going out, everyone's on a bicycle. It's just like, It's amazing. But then you realize what happened here 80 years ago, 90 years ago. And, it was chilling. And then the main reason that we wanted to see Amsterdam was the Anne Frank House. And so my wife and I were able to get tickets ahead of time. If you ever want to go to the Anne Frank House, you've got to get reservation tickets many months ahead of time. But we were able to go. We showed up at our time. We went through the Anne Frank House and Museum. And it was, extremely eye-opening. And you realize then, what people did in hiding to keep themselves safe. Well, of course, if you've read the Anne Frank diary, you know that they weren't safe. They were actually, it turns out, someone revealed where they were to the Gestapo. The Gestapo came in, deported them to Auschwitz. Actually, I think, I'm not sure if she went to Auschwitz or if she went to Buchenwald, but Anne Frank didn't survive the concentration camps. Out of the entire Frank family, only the father survived. So, and he lived to be, a very old man, and did nothing but honor his family his entire life. Preserved the building where his factory was, which is where they hid, so that it could be used as a museum and as a remembrance for what happened in Amsterdam and to the Jews of Europe. So, and that was it,
Well, that's a trip that Man and I are going to have to make someday.
Oh yeah,
the weather's a little better, but I'd like to see that. And I like how the Europeans try to own some of these things that happened, right? They're not trying to hide it. They're not trying to sweep it under the rug. A couple examples. One you just mentioned were those golden bricks that had those people who died there. The Anne Frank house is there. But there are bricks. Okay, so after World War I and World War II, World War I in particular, the Germans had to pay war reparations to those areas along the front line that got blown up. And when the Germans would send over the bricks and the building materials, they would stamp some of those as part of the war reparations so that the people knew, hey, this is stuff we're sending to you to help you rebuild because we blew your stuff up. The Germans, in terms of how they owned that period of history since World War II, I think is a model for how other countries, United States included, can own some of the uglier chapters of our history and how we shouldn't hide it. We shouldn't knock down statues and pretend like it didn't happen. We should we should have those things stand in mute testament to the things that we're proud of and the things that we should do differently as we go forward as a nation. And so I thought it was really cool to hear how, in Amsterdam, which wasn't aligned with the Nazi Party per se, but when the Gestapo came into some of these countries, there were a lot of people who were complicit with the Nazi Party and rounding up these Jews, and that the Dutch people, they own it and they memorialize it, and people like us can go there and say, shit, man, let's not do this again.
Right. Yeah.
Really cool, Rhino.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, man, it was an epic trip, just like our trip with Bill Parker back in 2022. I could do this multiple times a year if I could. I would love to do this stuff. This is just such a great, it makes me proud to be an American, to be able to go over there and to be able to listen to the people of Belgium, the people of Holland, the people of Luxembourg and France, as they talk about their, the gratitude that they have. I mean, it's not, for me, it's not like, oh, look at what we did, but it is humbling. And it really, I think, drives home the fact that, what America has done, whereas we come over and we push the invader out and we give the country back to the people and set up the government as it was before, is unique in history. And that's exceptional. That's amazing stuff.
Agreed. So for our audience, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We don't intend this to be a, hey, look at all the cool stuff Tony and Ryan did. We intend this to be, there are things that our audience, we think, has an appreciation for.
And it's awareness.
It's an awareness. There's a sneak preview. Think of this as a sneak preview of some of the things that we're going to have other people help us explain to you in more detail, because we think that you'll find it very compelling. And we also encourage other people who have had a chance to have gone over there and maybe seen some of these things that we have saw, or maybe other things that we missed. We encourage them to come to our Facebook page or our website and share them with us. Tell us what you saw when you were over there, or maybe you're planning a trip at some point. Let us know the sort of things that you want to go see when you go over there as well, because we'd like to hear some of the experiences that our audience has had when they go over to Europe or Japan or whatnot, and they want to relive some of these historical sites like Ryan and I have. What sort of experiences do you have? Go ahead and share them with us as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say, this is meant to be, like as Tony said, this episode today is really meant to be just an overview of the trip. And what we want to do is take some of these subjects and do some special episodes, and it'll be done throughout 2025. So we'll sprinkle some of these between series throughout 2025. And, hopefully it'll be a treat for you guys. And if you don't like it, you can skip to the next one.
That's right. We got a lot of good content coming up this year.
Yeah.
We think you're going to enjoy it. We're going to feature a Pearl Harbor veteran who served on a USS Nevada. And we got a bunch of other really cool stuff. We got a Marine veteran who survived Peleliu and Okinawa. All these are coming up. So stick around. We hope you enjoyed this overview of our trip. We hope that it's maybe conjured up some things that maybe you want to see, or maybe some memories from at times that maybe you went over there, and maybe you'll find some of these stories that we're going to have interesting. So until next time, I'm Tony Lupo.
And I'm Ryan Fairfield. I just want to say a big thank you. We didn't get to say this at the end of the year last year, but a big thank you to all of our listeners, everybody that comes to our Facebook page, that downloads our episodes every week, our premier subscribers, our premium subscribers. Please, for anybody out there that wants to listen to our episodes uncut, all in their entirety, it's $5 a month. It's a great deal. We're going to try to sweeten the pot for people, for our premium subscribers this year, and give you more than just the uncut episode. But we also have some great new material out on the Etsy store. I've got a new T-shirt on today. You can't really see it, but it's a black shirt with yellow writing on it. Anyway, thank you to everybody. Tony and I are extremely grateful to our listeners and those that are giving us feedback. This is such a fun thing to do, and we love being able to interface with you guys. So that's all I have. I'm Ryan Fairfield. Thanks again.
Tony Lupo. Till next time.
It cut you off again.
I know it always does.
Caw-caw!
There we go. We can't cut that off. Well, that's the end of the first air raid edition we've had in quite a while, but look for many, many more of these throughout the year. We want to add some additional content outside of what we normally do. We hope you enjoy it. If there's certain elements of our interviews that you'd like to see us expand upon for an air raid edition, leave us a note on our Facebook page or our website at thewarriornextdoor.com. Y'all take care.